Thanks for the warm welcome. It's great to be here. It's really great being at Boeing these days. This past year, we as a company turned 100 years old. And that sounds like a long time, and it has been. What's really cool about the company is we've been along the ride of the evolution of aviation since its conception. Although that 100 years as a company made us reflect because we're starting our second century, and we felt as a company we needed to go back to our roots and create a startup atmosphere, an entrepreneurial atmosphere within this large organization. And so in April this year, we launched an organization called HorizonX. And yes, we do investments, but actually, that's the easier part. We have two other main initiatives that we're doing at HorizonX. One is we've got a whole team of people tied closely to Greg Heislip, who was here yesterday in our Chief Technology Office, where we're working on disruptive projects in aviation and aerospace. And AI is a driver in a lot of that. If you think about what the potential is over the next 100 years and how transportation will transform, I'll just give you a quick example. Last month, I was traveling to Moscow, Russia, and I connected through London for a 3.5-hour flight from London to Moscow. And I landed on the ground in Moscow. I got into a car, and it took me 2 hours to get to my hotel. And that's just unacceptable. If you travel to India and you see the challenges that one of the fastest growing countries in the world is going through, it becomes unacceptable. And as entrepreneurs, it's an area for us to bring solutions to. And so we have groups of people who are off looking at those disruptions. The other thing that's happening is because of autonomy and what I call autonomy 2.0, which is when you take today's autonomy capabilities and really marry it together with artificial intelligence, you will find that things that fly are going to start doing different things than what they do today. It'll do connectivity in places that don't have connectivity or the right level of connectivity today. It will inspect infrastructure in a way that infrastructure is not inspected today. And it will do logistics in a way, just to name a few areas, that logistics aren't done today. So we have a whole team that's partnering with non-traditional customers and partners that are going to move into these new markets. And then finally, we put a venture fund together so we could go and invest in companies that help accelerate this. Because innovation happens everywhere. It happens inside companies like Boeing, but it also happens in places like Austin, Texas, and where I did my startup in a little town called Bingen, Washington, in Washington State, the poorest county in the state of Washington. And at one point, we were the fastest growing company in America, or one of the fastest growing companies in America. So it really can't happen anywhere. And so our venture fund allows us to reach out, and we do care about our financial return of our fund, but we care more about the innovation. And how do we take the innovation and bring it to a broader marketplace in both aerospace and aviation? So I'm really pleased to be here today. I really appreciate Spark Cognition putting this together. It's a great forum. Amir, thank you for your partnership along the way. And it truly has been a partner. Amir alluded to it at lunch today. When we make an investment in a company like we have made an investment in Spark Cognition, we like to find companies where we can take it a few steps further. And so we recently signed a partnership agreement together where we're going to be working on co-development capabilities that Spark can bring to the things that we do in aerospace, aviation, and defense. So lots of good things to come. Thank you. So anyhow, John, thank you, and thanks for having me.
So our next speaker, our next panelist is Vijay Doradla. He's with Verizon Ventures, and he's a director at Verizon Ventures, and has had a long career as not only as an investor, but as a technologist as well. So in addition to his role as Spark Cognition board observer and investor, he's a board member of 7 portfolio companies and has over 17 years experience in technology. He began his career at Bell Labs and then transferred over to Wall Street. One thing I'd like to say about Vijay, I've had the privilege to get to know him a little bit, is that like many of Spark Cognition's observers and board members, Vijay takes great pride in his role with the company. So please help me to welcome to the stage Vijay Doradla.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And my name is Vijay Doradla, and I'm part of the Verizon Venture team. I want to start off, I think we have 5 minutes to talk, and then we're going to jump on a panel. But I'd like to sort of go back to, I think, 2.5 years ago when we were looking at AI, we were looking at some of these frontier technologies, maybe 3 years ago. And it was still not a C-suite buzzword, right? It's become a C-suite buzzword, unfortunately. And I was on the board of a company here in Austin in the payment space, and I said, there has to be some companies in the space in Austin innovating on AI. And so we, sat down, we looked through, all these startups, and we found Spark. And I cold called Amir, and I said, hey, listen, this is who I am, and I'd love to, come and meet you and talk to you. And fast forward, I think it was in the following week, I met him, and within, I think the first maybe 25 minutes, I had made up my mind that I'm going to make an investment in Spark Cognition. And so we invested in the Series A investment 2.5 years ago. We led the round with Boeing in the Series C round, and it's been an absolute complete pleasure to be part of this journey with Amir and team. I'll talk a little bit about what is unique about Spark, and I don't want this to be a marketing event about Spark per se, but I'm on the board of actually now 10 companies, growing to maybe around 13 in the next, so it keeps exponentially increasing. But one of the things I've seen, one of the common threads I've seen in terms of successful startups and struggling startups is, and it fundamentally goes back to my investment philosophy, is the founding team, right, or the founders, right? And the common thread that emerges across all my portfolio is that the strongest companies are companies where the founders believe in their dreams, they believe in their technology, and the startup life is one of the toughest life on planet Earth as an entrepreneur, and it's never a straight line up or a straight line down. You have peaks and valleys, and when you're in those valleys, what you do to come out of that valley is what makes entrepreneurs successful, or sometimes people quit and decide to move on. A little bit about Verizon Ventures. So we've been around for a long time, but just 5 years ago, I was brought in to sort of expand the platform and expand the investment process and strategy. We're a team of 13 people, 5 investment professionals. We deployed around $120 million last year. And one question would come is, hey, why is Verizon interested in investments? And the way we look at this is, if you look at a telco, while we have been around as long as Boeing, and probably a little longer than Boeing, and the way we do things are slow, and it's a big company mentality. But if you look at the assets that we have and the assets that we essentially touch pretty much every single asset you can think of. When it comes to connectivity, when it comes to IoT, when it comes to next generation smart cities, AR and VR, which is very interlinked with communications. AI has become a frontier technology that's coming in for efficiency purposes. So that's the reason why we have a venture fund, and we've been very active in the areas of AI, blockchain, virtualization, next generation networks, and all that kind of stuff. In terms of AI, what we have been doing is looking at companies that can fundamentally transform the way we operate as a company. So I think there's a very interesting phenomenon going on where you look at the web scale guys like Facebook and Apple and Google and all that, and you look at the CapEx, the money they spend in terms of building out their infrastructure, they spend around between $2 and $5 billion a year. And then you look at an operator like Verizon or AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, whoever, we spend close to $20 billion a year in CapEx, right? And so what has happened since, and the web scale guys have been riding on top of us based on our connectivity. So we've been disaggregated from the consumer in terms of margins, in terms of profits, in terms of revenue growth. So one of the things that is happening in a very fast fashion, I would say in the last maybe 3 years, is an acceleration in the thought process, is when you are a $120 billion company, right, from a revenue perspective. So we're a $200 billion market cap company with $120 billion in revenue. For us to grow 5% year over year, we need to grow revenue by, $5 to $7 billion, which essentially means that we're creating a $5 to $7 billion startup every year, right? And so that's close to impossible to do, right? And with the challenges of innovation and all that kind of stuff, and the cultural mindset. So the other part of the equation is, okay, so how do we cut costs, right? So the thing that we're doing in the telco space is learning from our web scale folks as to how can we reduce the deployment of capital and increase the efficiencies. So a simple example, 2 or 3 years ago, or even 4 years ago, deploying an application in a wireless network took between 4 to 6 weeks. So deploying a new application, getting up and running, going through the 5.9 systems, and provisioning it, right? With next generation virtualization technologies like SDN and NFV, this can be done in hours, right? The same thing is happening on AI. We're looking at AI, application of AI towards call center innovation. We're looking at AI from a business process perspective. And more importantly, we're looking at AI in terms of customer engagement, right? So now, and there's a huge plethora of companies that are forming botnet type bots to respond to customer complaints and all that kind of stuff. So net, I think, while AI is a buzzword in the C-suite, and there's like close to 700,000 companies talking about AI, and it's become the most interesting pivot for a struggling company is just put the word AI behind them, and they all of a sudden become cool. The interesting thing is that I think this is for real. I think Spark is a very unique example. We're doing a POC with Spark where we had our big data models in predicting a truck rollout for a Fios customer or internet customer, and Spark had 20% of the data that we had, and without forecasting weather conditions and other stuff, Spark was able to return better results than our big data models, which had full forecast models and 100% of the data. So that is the power of AI, and Spark, as other companies, are going to definitely transform this world. So I'll get off stage and.
All right, so our next panelist is a true innovation leader here and a figurehead here in the Austin innovation economy. I've known Josh for some time, and really at the heart of it, what Josh does is he helps people quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs. He's the founder of Capital Factory. It's a co-working space and a mentorship-based accelerator designed to help startups find their investors, customers, and employees. Josh founded his first startup in 1996 in his college dormitory at CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, and he now teaches a class at UT for student entrepreneurs. He's been recognized as a Henry Crown Fellow and Braddock Scholar by the Aspen Institute, as well as an Eisenhower Fellow. That's amongst many other distinctions. Josh lives in Austin with his family, with his wife Amy and 3 kids, and I can tell you from experience he's a busy man. The easiest way to reach him is on Twitter, at Joshua Baer. So ladies and gentlemen, Josh Baer.
All right, hi everybody. Welcome. So I'm going to ask this question, but I really can't see your hands. How many of you are not from Austin? Okay, I see movement. There are some hands up there, maybe about half. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Austin and a little bit about Capital Factory and how that plays into what we're seeing with innovation and AI and investments. As John said, Capital Factory is just a few blocks from here. I walk down the street. We have about 60,000 square feet where over 1,500 entrepreneurs work every day. They're there day and night, building stuff and helping each other and teaching each other things. There are meetups and events happening there every day, maybe not quite so finely produced events as this, but but lots of examples of the same kinds of things, of people getting up and sharing what they know and teaching other people and helping them. There are formal classes that happen every day, teaching people how to code and teaching them about business and entrepreneurship. And then, like I said, a place for people to work. And the reason people work there is not because this is like the best desk or the cheapest desk. They could work from home for free. They could work from a coffee shop. They could work from a lot of other co-working spaces. The reason they're there is because of the people that are there, because everybody around them is focused on technology and startups and innovation. And they really think that aspirationally, they go there thinking, I'm going to meet somebody who's going to change my life. I'm going to meet my co-founder. I'm going to find my first investor. I'm going to find my first customer or strategic partner or something like that. And those are really life-changing things for a person and for a company, and that's what they come there looking for. And that's really about community. And so the heart and soul of our place is our mentor network. We have over 250 local CEOs and founders who volunteer their time, usually about once a month, to come pay it forward and help other people get their businesses started. And I'll tell you, they do that because for a lot of different reasons, but number one, they do it because it's a ton of fun. They love doing it, and they love engaging with other entrepreneurs and meeting them and helping them. And again, for me, that's really kind of the heart and soul of what we do, and one of the best parts of what happens there. So just some quick examples of some of the companies that we see. We work with hundreds of different companies across every different market and technology. But as you can probably imagine, some of the hottest technologies right now are around artificial intelligence. I think, as Vijay said, it's quite true that a lot of startups having some trouble go register the .ai version of their domain name, and suddenly fundraising gets a lot easier. But I think we've got some real innovations happening out of that as well. This example is called Sensei, and David in the blue shirt with his back to us is an entrepreneur that we just moved here from Los Angeles earlier this year. He started working on this eye tracking sensor technology as his 9th grade science project, and then dropped out of high school. So I couldn't quite help him quit his job. But he's now hired a whole team of PhDs. He's 20 now. And what his technology does is using high resolution cameras in real time, watches the minute 200 muscles around your iris in your eye, which are the only muscles that are actually directly connected to your brain, and uses that to detect, using a lot of artificial intelligence and computer vision and other things, to detect emotion, deception, and intent. And so they literally can read your mind by watching your eyes. And as much as that sounds crazy and like science fiction, we kind of all know it's true, right? You'd like, look me in the eye, tell me if you're lying. Like, that really comes from somewhere. But it's only through artificial intelligence and computer vision that we can really start to unlock that. And another big part of this is, in order to process all of the data that goes into the intelligence that we want to have, we just have more and more data that feeds into it, more and more data being generated from IoT, from sensors, from all the things feeding into the intelligence that we want to get out of it. And so another company we work with is called Pelosa. Pelosa is another Austin company here, and what they are is a new kind of a database designed for accessing lots of very large amounts of data very, very quickly with more efficient indexes that are pre-computed and allow it all to happen a lot faster. And so that's going to feed a lot of the AI engines and other things that we want to do and provide the data for them that they need. So here in Austin, we are obviously in the middle of Texas, and one of the things that we're so excited about right now here in Austin is the idea of connecting all of Texas together. We call this the Texas Startup Manifesto. And what you can see is Austin in the middle there, but with 4 other cities around it: Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. And some of you may or may not know, but those are 4 of the 10 largest cities in the country, 4 of the fastest growing cities in the country, and 4 of the top startup hubs in the country. And what's so unique about it is the geography, the fact that they're all so close together. Yesterday, I was in Dallas for the day. The day before that, I was in San Antonio for the day. And that's what's possible here in Texas that really isn't possible in other places. That from any one city, you can actually work and do business in all of the cities really easily. And if you're a startup that's launching a business and you want to launch it market by market, you can come launch in one of these cities and then launch the other 3 cities without having to have additional headquarters, all with one headquarters. And so a lot of businesses expand that way geographically, and that's a really interesting opportunity as well. This is a study by the Kauffman Foundation, which is a nonprofit that supports and studies entrepreneurship all over the world, based in Kansas City. And every year they rank all the different startup communities based on their entrepreneurial activity. And as you can see, Austin is always at the top of that list. It's been number 1 or number 2 for the past few years. And as much as I love Miami, Miami is very much skewed from one particular startup, Magic Leap, which throws off all the numbers for Miami as far as funding raised and things like that. So Austin, if you were to take Magic Leap out of it, Austin would shoot up to number 1 really easily. And you can see all of Texas is really strong. San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston all have really robust, strong technology and entrepreneurship communities with all different things to offer, different types of talent pools, different companies and large companies, lots of private equity and wealth that's in Texas. San Antonio has a big military base and a big cybersecurity focus. Houston, obviously, oil and gas and health. Dallas has retail and travel and entertainment and a whole bunch of other things that go with it. And so there's a lot of different parts to this state that tie together. And so one of the things we're doing to deal with that, this is a road trip that we took. That was the road trip to Houston. And then we just did one just like this on Tuesday to San Antonio. And so we're literally chartering a bus and filling it up full of investors and mentors and entrepreneurs and physically taking them from city to city to try to connect the dots and make this big state a little bit smaller. So that's a little bit about what we're doing, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with the rest of the panel and talking about what kind of startups we're seeing and how we're encouraging particularly AI startups in what we do.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to invite the panelists back up. Really what I wanted to get started with is just hear from each of the panelists what your strategy is, what's your AI strategy, right? Whether it's Verizon's or telecom, whether it's Boeing and aviation and defense. And Josh, what I'm really interested to hear from you is kind of what the Austin AI ecosystem looks like and what are the applications that you are seeing the most interest in. You see a really wide array of AI companies here in town, AI startups, and you also see the companies and investors who are interested in those. So maybe we'll start with Vijay and kind of make our way down.
So one of the things that I alluded in my 2-minute, 3-minute presentation was that I think the problem right now is there's a lot of noise. And as I was mentioning to, and Josh also alluded to it, that many companies in the ad tech space are pivoting and they put in .ai after their domain name. And so the challenge I've been facing a lot is how do I filter the signal from the noise, right? So as a simple example, just recently, me and my manager, we went through 700 companies, AI companies, right? And we went through every single one of them to see, okay, what do these guys do? And obviously, based on the public information available through PitchBook and these databases. And then I think we talked to close to maybe 50 or 70 companies. And many of them just fall apart in the first 5-7 minutes. These are not. So I think the biggest challenge right now is your signals to noise, right? How do you filter the signal from the noise? Having said that, I feel a little lucky in the sense that I hit a small little jackpot with Amir and team, where it gives me a reference point as to what is a true AI company, right? Yeah. And so I always go back to the Spark model and the Spark technology to sort of reference what a company is doing. Having said that, I think there's also a phenomenon happening where the AI space started off as a platform play, right? And so a lot of companies raise a lot of money at very high valuations and said, we're a platform company, we can go anywhere, we can go here or there, right? And then all of a sudden these platform companies have zero revenue and they haven't been able to raise any money, so they're becoming hedge funds. So they're going to the market and they're applying their algorithms to the market to generate some revenue so they can, invest in their future. The separate phenomenon is a very use case specific application of deep learning neural networks in AI to problems such as customer care or healthcare or fintech, right? And these are companies that are building going to very specific pain point in a chain and bringing automation to it, right? So that phenomenon will continue, but I feel like it'll be very hard to see the kind of valuations you see in that small use case type startups versus a platform startup. But as I said, right now it's just a lot of noise, so I just take it a day at a time.
So once you're able to find that signal through the noise, kind of What are the applications that Verizon is looking to?
So as I mentioned earlier, we have assets pretty much everywhere, right? So we have a wireless network. So we have $120 billion in revenue. Our wireless business is around $80 billion in revenue. We have an enterprise business which is around $30 plus billion. We have an IoT business which is close to like a couple of $1 billion, right? So there are our managers and our developers are saying, hey, very different use cases. Smart cities is an example. IoT is an example. Customer care is a very big focus because we're unionized, given we've been around for a long time, so our customer care representatives are unionized. So a big focus in the company is, how do I reduce the number of calls going to my call center folks? How can I, because that saves us money, right? So companies, there are a couple of companies in Canada that are building, automating that process where they can reduce the calls going to the call center by like 20%. And that translates into EBITDA and bottom line for us, right? So we're looking at pretty much everywhere, right? And security, cybersecurity is a big focus of ours. And Spark is, we're doing some POCs there as well. So all over the place.
That's great.
John, are you guys creating the AI union?
Yeah. We are not creating
all the AIs to collectively bargain.
Definitely not. But so Steve, you and I had a chance to visit at HorizonX headquarters. What are the applications that Boeing's looking at?
Yeah, I'd take a look at our two main businesses, and it's not so AI is maybe the key brain in all of these emerging technologies, the Internet of Things and everything that's and where computing power is going, the network connectivity, the network speeds, where 5G will go and accelerate even more. All of those are enablers. What's changing is people, behaviors, and expectations. And so individuals want connected transport. They want things to happen automatically. And there's a lot of complexity in the entire system. And where artificial intelligence, where that brain comes in, is to simplify those complexities. And so if you look at the transportation side of our business, for example, we have an incredible backlog in our business. If you think about only 10% of the people in the world have actually traveled on an airplane. Right? It's an amazing amount of growth that's still going to happen. You see what's happening in China and the growth in India and the connectivity that has to happen. Our core business is very, very strong in both what we call our wide body business and our single aisle business. We're producing 42 737s a month, and we're going into the 50s. So it's like we're building a 737 in less than a day, right? So it's just crazy. But that's only half the issue. This other transportation and connected transport and using utilization business models is going to change the way we move around. And you're going to be at your home and you're going to say, I want to get to Detroit. And it's going to figure it all out for you, right? You don't have to sit there and figure it out. It's going to figure it out for you based upon your demands. And then on the security side of our business, which is incredibly important because if it's not for the security of our nation, we're all not sitting here. Entrepreneurialism doesn't live if we don't protect our freedoms. And these technologies, as has been talked about somewhat at this conference, can be used as good or used for bad depending on the person. And so the best way you protect yourself is to be the strongest at it, right? So you can deter, those type of attacks. And that's just the world that we live in. And so where we've always protected ourselves physically, we now have to worry about protecting ourselves electronically. And so that side of our business is going to go through a major transformation, and our customers are, really focused on that area because there's something in the military called the offset, the first offset, second offset, and the third offset. First offset started in the 60s when there was major powers between Russia and U.S. building up and these stockpiles of weapons, and they had to build each other up to protect one another and to not have battle. And then the next tactical offset came where it was more maneuverable weapons. And now there's what's called the third offset, which is the focus is really on how do we use these emerging technologies not only to protect ourselves, but also to make sure that we're in a position that we can be offensive if we have to. And so it's a really dynamic time, and AI, is in the middle of that. And to Amir's comments at lunch today, it's a huge social responsibility also.
Absolutely. And I do want to get back to that. Real quick, Josh, you have a little bit of a different perspective here. You're looking at a lot of different companies, a whole ecosystem. What are those AI applications that you're seeing the most excitement for, at least here in the region? And you showed the triangle, so extend that to Texas.
Sure. Well, we do see a really wide range of industries, of verticals is how we would think about them. And so we see all kinds of things, but a lot in health with the new medical school, in transportation is huge, in education, in real estate, believe it or not. We have a ton of real estate stuff, but a huge range of things, especially being here in Austin, whereas maybe some of the other cities in Texas, like Houston, tends to have a lot of oil and gas and a lot of health. We see a lot of different things. But then we also see across that different technologies, which tend to be more horizontal, which go across the board. And I'd say the three technologies most interesting to us right now for 2018 are augmented reality, blockchain, and artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, probably the most real and the most immediate of all those things. And I really look at it similar to how I saw the internet. In really the first wave of the internet, that was when I first got involved in business in the kind of mid to late 90s. And the first wave of the internet was really just apply the internet to everything, right? And what has the internet brought? It brought transparency and reduced friction. And so any marketplace, any business, anything, you could go apply the internet to it, and it generally just made it better. It made more transparency in the marketplace, everybody could see everything, and it reduced the transaction costs, made it easier for stuff to happen. And you could just bang, 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 do that industry by industry by industry. And I think we're going to see that same thing, and we are seeing that same thing with AI. And that is that AI is going to transform every different industry. And whatever industry you're in, you need to be figuring out, how does this apply to me? What's this going to change? And what's it going to do? And so we are seeing that in every different area, where especially the more data that's available, how they're using that. In particular, some examples would be, we have a company called Cerebri that we work with that's doing it particularly focused on the sales process. We have a company called Closed Loop that's focused on looking at health and looking at and really trying to get some domain expertise around how they can apply this to big data problems in health. And I think as you were saying, there's the platform play, which is we've got a generic tool we can use lots of ways. That's a big vision. But at the beginning, you got to get your initial customers to get it going. And so the things that we do see getting more traction tend to have that combined with a focus, where, hey, we know not only do we know AI, but we know a lot about this thing and how to apply that over and over and over again.
Well, that was Spark Cognition strategy, starting off with energy and since expanding. So, early stage to later stage, seeing a lot of companies. Vijay touched on this. How do you, in particular, as companies are coming in, or individuals with, it's a guy or gal with a deck, how are you finding that signal through the noise with as much as you're seeing?
Well, this is one way we're probably very, very different, right? I am way at the very earliest stages, and typically corporate investors tend to be more growth investors in businesses that are a little bit more well-defined and understood, and because they can afford to wait a little bit longer to see how it goes. And so we're really just investing in people. It's really about the people and the teams and what they bring to the table, and do we believe in them? Because honestly, there's not a whole lot else to look at the beginning. And so, for example, in the case of the healthcare startup that I talked about, that's Closed Loop. It's a serial entrepreneur who this is his third business. We worked with him on his last business, and he was a great steward of that. He paired up with another entrepreneur who brings a ton of healthcare expertise and has been working in big data and AI and healthcare already. And so now we've got a great team focused on a pretty well-defined problem in a space that we know is really interesting. That's the kind of person that we want to back, or kind of team that we want to back. And
before I jump to you, Steve, it's got me thinking about a question. So, you got that entrepreneur, done 3 startups in healthcare. How are you assessing the validity of their technological prowess, right? Especially when it comes to AI. What are you looking at the difference between they are developing a unique AI algorithm, or they're taking open source methods and applying it to their domain that they really know? I mean, is that something that you're looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see a lot of pitches and demos, and quite often, especially when the entrepreneurs are used to pitching people who may not be that familiar with AI, they actually sometimes just pitch like a standard AI demo. It's like a TensorFlow demo or like some kind of thing that they didn't really do much. They just really are showing you AI, not actually their AI. And so you want to be able to see through those types of things and realize, okay, they're not really developing any core IP or technology. They're really just applying some toolkit to something that's out there. But in general, we're really, we don't do deep technical analysis. Again, we're going to start with the team. So I know these people are capable of doing these types of things because they've done them before, or their resume or their pedigree. And then we really focus on traction. And again, this is what's going to drive towards the customer focus is our proof that it works is we want to see it working with customers. And that's going to be customers responding to it, customer feedback coming out of it. And that's the number one signal we're going to look for.
And so, Steve, how are you separating the signal from the noise? I mean, not only is this about investment for Boeing, but I mean, you're looking at, and you've had a lot of leadership roles in Boeing, so you really know the importance of how we're going to apply this. Mm-hmm. It's more than just let's throw some money at it and look at it. How are you guys really assessing the technology?
Yeah, and we may be a little bit different than most CVCs, corporate venture capitalists, from a standpoint of. And I said in my opening, we're really focused on the innovation piece of it, mm-hmm. Because what we're trying to do is to find companies that we can make an investment in, but we can also do something with them, either to make us within our company more productive, or taking that innovation to the marketplace, within our product sets. Because our marketplace scalability is a huge issue for startups, right? They're big markets, they're big customers, and trying to break in is incredibly difficult. So we become a little bit of a channel to market in some ways. So we have been making investments in companies that are earlier stage than what you would see typically in most CVCs. We are making Series A investments and Series B, and we're kind of more focused in that area. And we've been doing this. We launched in April of this year, and next week they won't go public until January, but we'll close on a couple more deals next week. And so, by the end of the calendar year, we'll formally have 10 companies in our portfolio. So we're averaging more than an investment a month. Wow. We got a couple that are operating in stealth mode right now, and so they're that early stage because we found. Some innovation that we really liked, and it fits a piece of the puzzle inside of what we're doing.
Yeah. And Vijay, I know you touched on it. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. We're corporate venture capital, but I think that every CVC is slightly different, mm-hmm. right? I think the goals are the same. Is that can we, let's take look at the numbers as an example, right? If I invest $1 million and I have 100x return on a company, which is a huge return, right? Okay, so I make $100 million. That doesn't even move the needle for Verizon when it comes to top line or bottom line.
We're happy to make $100 million.
So the dream sort of investment for us is, can we invest in a company that can materially impact the trajectory of some of our business units and sort of expand the speed at which we bring products to market, right? So we are stage agnostic. I would say like 30% of our companies, 30 to 40% of our companies are Series A. We have a big chunk in Series B. We shy away from late stage investments because we don't want to chase valuations. We're very valuation sensitive. But we also are investors in some venture platforms where, slightly different from what Joshua is doing, but where the founders of the platform are very successful repeat entrepreneurs who are technologists. And they come up with ideas, and they actually go and hire the second co-founder, the third co-founder, mm-hmm. and incubate the product and get it from seed to Series A. So it's not a numbers game per se, but a very focused based on their core competencies, right? Yeah. So we're sort of all over the place, but to just add to this discussion, I think a CVC is, in my view, is a Series B is sort of a good fit, mm-hmm. Where there's some traction, there's some revenue, there's some customers, versus just in seed or even early Series A, you have a PowerPoint slide and you're trusting your time and your energy in the hands of entrepreneurs, right? So that would be 2 cents here.
Yeah. So I'm interested to get everyone's perspective on this, especially the stages. Steve, why should a company take corporate money? I mean, why should a company take corporate investment?
It's a great question, and it's something that I think startups need to think long and hard about on whether you take on a CVC, and I think it depends on what CVC you take it from, because we are all different. And then there's other venture capitalists that if you're going to go seek money from, some of them like having CVCs involved and some of them don't. And in our space, what I can tell you what venture capital is like about us is in the heavy technical businesses, I bring a technology bench to due diligence like nobody can. I mean, I got buildings full of rocket scientists. And so they love it because we can really validate. And we can, we'll look at stuff and say, yeah, invention needs to happen there, but boy, if they can make that happen, let's go. Yeah. So you have that, and for our business, because it is back to the scalability issue, it really is hard. And so having the market access is one of the areas where we're kind of people like to have us along because it opens up some level of market access.
So in terms of CVCs versus financial VCs, I think that they're very different set of core competencies. I would say fundamentally we all want to make a lot of money on our investments. We want our startups to be very successful. And in the case of CVC, it materially impacts us from a business perspective. Having said that, I think CVCs tend to be, a little more patient when it comes to the entrepreneurs. When you're in that valley, the question is who is with you in that valley, right? Because when you're on the top of the hill, everybody's your friend, right? Everybody wants a piece of you. But and the journey of a startup is never a straight line up or a straight line down. So I spend a big amount of my time with entrepreneurs who are in this, trying to solve this problem, having a tough time, and there's a point where you have to take the emotion and the personal relationship out of the equation and say, okay, this company's not going to make it, right? So that's one thing about the CVC. The second thing is, as Steve mentioned, is the channel, the core competency, the technical due diligence we can do, right? What I always tell my startups is, listen, if you want to come to Verizon for money and you just want our distribution scale, we're probably not the right partner for you because we have 100 other guys who are knocking on our door who want to give us money for our distribution platform, right? Having said that, if there's a fundamental technology that materially benefits us, we will just jump on it and invest.
So Josh, when would you and wouldn't you counsel an earlier stage company to take corporate money versus financial venture capital?
Sure. We had quite a few of our startups have worked with corporate venture capital in different ways, and we currently, while we don't have a relationship with Verizon or Boeing yet, we do work with we do work with Walmart, Mercedes, Merck, the Department of Defense, Booz Allen, and a number of big brands to help them connect with startups and figure these types of things out. And as they kind of touched on, from an entrepreneur's kind of selfish perspective, it's really about distribution and customers. And what they bring is customer validation and themselves typically being potentially very large customers, and then access to a large base of customers. And that's a way that they can be a very strategic investor, different than any other type of investor that's generally just putting in money or expertise. Now, the flip side of that is, as we would work with an entrepreneur and kind of counsel them on how to do these, the number one kind of red flag gotcha is going to be make sure you get a really clean term sheet and a really clean set of terms from a corporate VC. Lately, in the past few years, I actually have found this to not be much of an issue. I feel like most corporate VCs are generally on this page. But maybe 10, 15 years ago, there were some issues where you would get a deal with a corporate VC, and there'd be some clause in there that was very advantageous to them, but could maybe really make it difficult for you to raise more money or sell the company later. So you need to make sure that in doing such a deal like that, you don't close too many doors that keep you from have optionality. Now, it might be okay to have some period of exclusivity, like maybe 6 months or a year or something like that, or some other types of information notices, making sure that they're able to bid if you go to sell the company. But you'd probably want, in general, you probably would want to avoid something that said, for example, a first right of refusal to invest, or a long-term exclusivity clause that kept you from doing business with other people.
That's a very good point that Josh mentions, because you look at the business units. I don't know what Steve would be interesting to get your thoughts. But when sometimes we have these business units who are actually launching products with startups, and they're the biggest vocal proponents of investing in these companies, but they want to put those clauses in. Right? So we take a very, very entrepreneur-friendly approach. We say, like, listen, they're not going to be any warrants. They're not going to be any right of first refusal, because it takes away from the company and the success of a company.
I couldn't agree with you more. And from a Boeing perspective, and probably one of the reasons why I'm in this role is I've been on both sides.
Yeah.
I've been on the entrepreneurial sides, and so a lot of times I'm the advocate for for the startup that we're investing in, and can understand where we're going to get our value from. Yeah. And having some of those onerous terms are not how we want to drive value.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were just touching on it, integration, right? So you invest in a company, or you advise a company to work with the CVC. Especially for large companies, right? There's a lot of different departments, a lot of different divisions. What are you finding with regard to the push-pull? Is it all pull? Is there a little bit of push? Do you go talk to the different departments and organizations and managers beforehand, have them involved in that assessment period? Or do you just look at that technology and say, we've got to have it and we'll figure, I'm guessing you don't do the latter, but how do you work the integration in when you're investing in an organization and then, counseling one through that process? We can start with.
Yeah, so very good question. And I would say it's a mixed batch, right? Because sometimes you invest in companies where the business units are not particularly hot. I'll give you a simple example. We were investors in one of the fastest growing virtualization companies in the Valley. Sequoia Capital is an investor, and Mayfield Partners. They have a very good, solid team. And we invested in them, but the business unit had, was going to market with a competitor. And so you have those dynamics happen all the time, right? But fast forward 3.5 years, that competitor got taken out, and we're going to market with this company, right? Which we were investors in. So it's a mixed batch. So the way Verizon Ventures is structured is we have an investment committee, which comprises of our C-suite, the CFO, the Chief Product Officer, Chief Strategy Officer, and Chief Technology Officer, right? And we do our due diligence, and we consult with the business units. As long as the business units don't absolutely hate it to their gut, we have the ability to go and invest. In some cases, we've also had a situation where we had internal products which were competing with some of the investments we made, but the investment committee said, absolutely go ahead and make this investment, because this product doesn't work and we need something that's going to sort of replace it, right? So it's sort of a mixed bag, but there's a general loose sort of communication and collaboration. We don't need any sign-offs from the business units, but we work with them because they're in the trenches and they know the technology and they're going to market with some of these products.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're new at this. We're like I said, 8 months into it, and we've made 10 investments to date. So that the story there is we are moving fast inside the Boeing company. I mean, if you just think about that, we're closing deals in weeks. We have a very streamlined approval process inside the company at the right levels of the corporation. So we're moving very quickly. We're now how do we transition that process to the integration piece? Yeah. And we're learning that with the companies that we're starting up right now, that like Spark Cognition, the pent-up demand inside the company is huge. With trying to get to facilitate the engagement, which we've accomplished but took longer than we wanted to, is a learning exercise. Now we apply to the next one. We invested in a company called Near Earth Autonomy, which is a Carnegie Mellon spin-out company up in Pittsburgh. Sanjay Singh, great CEO. And on that one, we got engaged a lot faster because we were able to learn about how we're doing. And now there's people inside the company who are pulling on his technologies a lot broader than what we even originally imagined. Yeah. So it's been really good.
You know, it's funny, these stories you tell remind me, you know, I think in particular that makes me think of Google. I think the bigger your company is, the more of an issue of the alignment becomes that can possibly be out of whack. The smaller it is, obviously the tighter it's going to be. I think a lot of startups make the mistake of thinking that a really big company acts like one big company, but actually a really big company often is like 50 different companies, right? You know, and navigating within it is really like, okay, I got this part, but like that's like almost like a whole different group of people and company, and they make their own decisions, and I got to go win them over separately. With Google, we've seen this where, you know, Google, you know, is an investor. I believe Google Ventures is an investor in Uber, and then they have Waymo, and they're like their own competing service, kind of like you were talking about, or they were an investor in, I think, you know, the Mesh Wi-Fi networking groups, one of the up-and-coming startups, and then they released their own product, right? And you know, that startup's got to be scratching their head, you know, going like, wait a minute, I thought we had Google.
They have a sort of mixed track record.
Yeah, so but they're one of the biggest, right? They're really, really big, so you get those kinds of conflicts. And probably the smaller the organization, I would think just naturally there'd be less of that. But it is a real big learning lesson for startups trying to navigate this, is realizing that, hey, there's a lot of different stakeholders, and one of them might be the corporate VC, but then there's, you know, what are the stakeholders within the business? And I'd say in a similar kind of way, when you get any kind of partnership with a big company, you can sign a piece of paper that says, we're going to promote you, we're going to do these different things, we're going to do whatever. Making that really happen is a whole other story, right? And making that happen within the organization, and I think that's going to, you know, follow through a lot of these types of organizations, relationships as well.
So a little bit of a follow-on question to that, Steve. You know, buy versus build. You know, the two organizations, Verizon and Boeing, have pretty much any resource at their disposal. At what point do you say, when you go out to the market to try to find this technology, this innovation, you know, versus we'll do this in-house, and it's specific to AI technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually fundamentally changing within our company right now, the whole buy versus build, and we'll take multiple bets, you know, depending on the size of the bet. And that's one of the advantages of, you know, us launching up HorizonX, is really what we are doing is adding additional bets, you know, putting more irons in the fire for some innovation solutions. So on some of the disruptive projects that we're working on in the marketplace, you know, we're putting, you know, 2 or 3 different bets on different things, both organic and inorganically, of some capability gaps that we think exist that we can try to close. And we're approaching it that way. So it almost becomes this, you know, this R&D portfolio, if you will, of both what's happening outside of our company and what's happening inside.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and it's a mix and match of buy, build, invest, right? So we are pretty prolific in terms of acquisitions of small companies in the $10 to $20 million range, $10 to $30 million range. We just closed a bunch of deals this week. In cybersecurity, as an example, our enterprise guys wanted a small company of 15 people, and they bought it. From a bigger picture perspective, excuse me, you know, the buy part of Verizon is very focused on how does it materially impact the long-term trajectory of the company. And you can't, you know, we're not at a point where we're not going to spend like $10 billion buying a technology company, right? We're looking at media assets, we're looking at other stuff, right? So our buying part generally is smaller, and also historically, you know, when you buy a company and try to integrate it into a big company, many times these companies fall apart. And it's not just Verizon, but Google, you know, has been horrible in terms of integrating all their acquisitions, right? And they're now spinning them out, right? So I think that's where, you know, I think we do a lot of smaller acquisitions, and the bigger ones are, you know, more trajectory changing than anything else.
Josh, what are you seeing from your side?
You know, from the startup side, I think, to speak very broadly, there's really 2 different kinds of large companies that you're working with, and there's a small number of them that tend to be, you know, in the generalizations, the Googles and the Amazons, where they have great capability to develop stuff in-house themselves, and they are much more likely to look at something and really be like, you know, well, we can just build that. We don't need to. We're not going to buy you guys. We're not going to go do that. In general, with large companies, and it's because they have such strong engineering teams and that culture of that, and that's like really everything that they still think of themselves like a startup a little bit at that level. for most big companies, it's not a concern we have as a startup, because really that's the only advantage that the startup has, is they can move really fast and run circles around the big companies. And if you think about it, startups shouldn't be able to compete in any way against the big companies. Like, they're bigger, they have more money, they have more resources, they have more engineers, they have market position, they have customers. Like, why can a startup do anything, right? Because you should beat them on every scale, right?
Yeah, and I mean,
but the
But it
fact
goes
is,
back to Josh, what you mentioned, that these big companies are a bunch of small companies together.
well, that,
Right.
and partly because of that, so I think it's mainly two main things. One, big companies, they're slow, and they're slow because it takes a lot of people to make a decision,
Yeah.
right? And you have a lot of different parties to work with, and that slows down the whole process. So in the time that the big company is trying to decide whether or not to build or buy, the startup built it.
Yeah.
Seriously, right? You know, like in 2 months, right? And then the other side of that is that big companies are inherently risk averse.
Yes.
They're not going to go bet the whole company on trying to do some crazy thing because they got a lot to lose. They shouldn't. And the people they hire to run a big company, they wouldn't have hired them if they were the kind of people that were going to bet the whole company on some crazy idea or something like that. And those are the two advantages startups have. If it weren't for that, startups wouldn't exist at all. But because of that, that's their advantage, and that lets them move quickly. And in general, that makes us say, you know what? Yeah, although we could say one of them could go build it or whatever, just go build it as fast as you can, run as fast as you can, and chances are they'll acquire you.
So what I'd like to add here is, again, a big company, there are different flavors of the big companies, but one of the very interesting things is we have a product team, right? If you look at the product team of maybe a couple of thousand people, they have 100 products that they're building. If you go and look at the teams that are building it, they're 10 to 12 people who are building this, right? So you have 10 to 12 people with no funding visibility versus a startup, right? And you're competing with, a hyper-focused startup with money and visibility, right? So it becomes very challenging for a company like Verizon to sort of innovate internally, right? So we're very good in the service industry of getting vendors and integrating things and offering it as a service. But then if you look at Google as an example, I think it's still 90+% of their revenue comes from search, right? So again, that's another behemoth which has a different, but I would say that I tell my startups that you're actually better off, as you mentioned, Joshua, from a speed, from a funding perspective and focus perspective, that you can build this faster. By the time a decision is made in a large company, you can build it, so I totally agree with you on that.
And I agree with everything you said. One additional advantage for a startup is the free thinking and creativity.
Yeah.
Right? You haven't been immersed in an environment where here's how it's been done. And so you don't know what you don't know, and that's sometimes good.
Right.
Yeah. We've got one question here.
So as it pertains to AI, one of the things that's been hard is explaining AI to a market. Can you describe a little bit, as you evaluate startups, between the technology, the business model, and the go-to-market strategy? How do you think about those when you evaluate AI startups?
So it's very simple, actually. I'll flip it around and say it's very simple to explain AI to the market, right? And it's just AI is a term you could apply this across all frontier technologies like blockchain or other stuff, right? And that is, what is the pain point you're trying to solve? Okay, number one. Number two is, what is your roadmap in terms of go-to-market? Right? So if you have a go-to-market that's very complex and it has dependencies on partners and suppliers, then all of a sudden the story becomes very complex, right? So I think you just have to dial this back to, what are you trying to do? What is the pain point you're trying to solve? And is this pain point a big problem in the market? That's how I'd answer it.
You took the words out of my mouth. Instead of pain point, I was going to say the problem the customer has, right, or the problem in the world that you're trying to solve it. And that's the one thing with technologies. Everybody wants to, it's hard for people to grasp and understand the level of complexity of the technology. It's about the application of it and what you're trying to solve. And that's the key. And it's not just a problem for startups. We have this problem inside our company, and from an innovation standpoint. We have an incredible deep technology bench, but it's articulating what problem am I solving? And then how do I make money at it? Because if you can't make money at it, there's not a lot of value.
I can't see you, but I recognize your voice. I'm pretty sure that was JD. And I think from what we're seeing, most of the applications we see tend to be actually pretty easy to explain because it's almost like an A/B test. And it's usually, here's how people are making this decision. And they can often, when it's an interesting product, they can show that here's a scenario where the AI is performing better, produces better results. And that's usually your threshold, right? Is like, when can we get to the point where the computer is consistently making better predictions than the people? Now, the flip side of that, what I've also seen is people still don't trust it, right? People still have this inherent feeling that maybe it's like we want to feel important, that like, well, we need to be part of this too, right? We need to, and so the most common application we're seeing is not the AI making the decision, but the AI making the suggestion to the person who then interprets that and applies it to whatever it may be. But as far as like making the case, if you're doing it right, hopefully the case should be math. And it's just like, look, this thing works better, and we've got the data behind it and the other things to show it that this is really going to produce better results.
Yeah, I'll give you one example. We had a company that approached us that had some technology that they claimed, hey, you can roll this thing down, the aisle of an aircraft, and in 5 to 15 minutes, it will eliminate all the germs on the aircraft. And as a passenger, as we all know, flying on airplanes, and you see the people out there Pirelling their tray tables, you intuitively say, oh, well, that's good. That's a great invention. But then you go back to the business model and the economics of how airlines work, and does the consumer think it's a problem? And the reality is the consumer doesn't. They're fine with their Perel hand wipes. And the airline's not willing to take the risk from the economics of putting another process in place that's going to eat 5 to 15 minutes. So Southwest turns an aircraft at a gate in less than 30 minutes, right? So you put that risk factor in there, even though it's just minutes, it changes the entire business model for them. And so it's not, that's why the problem you're trying to solve in the business aspects are more important than the technology.
See, instead, the AI should be choosing to charge the dirty passengers more. That should be
Well, on that, unfortunately, we're all out of time. If y'all can help me thank our panel.
Thank you so much.